The Cowboys' top ground gainer is number 43, Don Perkins. Don Perkins, the pride of the Cowboys, a clever, powerful runner, a back who can do it all. Perkins turns the corner against the Packers, and it takes 43 yards.
Perkins showcased his talents at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, where he excelled as a 3-time All-Skyline selection. Known for his exceptional skills on the field, he earned the title of Skyline Sophomore of the Year and led the nation in kickoff returns in 1958. His achievements were recognized with a third-team All-American honor in 1959, solidifying his place as one of the university's most significant athletes. His head coach was Marv Levy, who regarded Perkins as one of the greatest players he ever coached. Perkins later signed a personal services contract with the Dallas Cowboys franchise in November 1959, setting the stage for his NFL career. Despite a setback with a broken foot in 1960, Perkins made a remarkable comeback in 1961.
On the last play of the quarter, Don Perkins sends up a cloud of dust on a Cowboy quick opener. He kicks up his heels for 22 yards as the first quarter ends,
establishing himself as a standout player with 815 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns in his rookie season.
The Cowboys ride deep into Birdland as our ground camera picks up Don Perkins staking claim to a touchdown early in the second period.
Perkins had amazing quickness and burst on the field that year.
One man the Dallas offense counted on to provide the spark. The impetus. It was Don Perkins.
He was 6th in the league in rushing yards. He was the first Pro Bowler in Dallas Cowboys history. He won the Rookie of the Year honors that year as well.
Now at Don Perkins, the pride of the Cowboys, a clever, powerful runner, a back who can do it all. Perkins turns the corner against the Packers, and it takes 43 yards.
The next season, Perkins took the next step. His 945 rushing yards were ranked 5th in the league. His 7 touchdowns were ranked 4th in the league. He led the league in yards among running backs. That season for Perkins marked the first All-Pro in Dallas Cowboys history.
Perkins' lightning acceleration at the snap of the ball enables him to explode past the line of scrimmage and into the heartland of the enemy.
In his first 2 seasons, he was the first Pro Bowler and All-Pro in Cowboys history.
In 1964, the Dallas Cowboys continued their upward climb in the NFL's Eastern Division. The Cowboys' top ground gainer is number 43, Don Perkins.
In 1964, Perkins had another dominant year. In each of his first 8 games, he had 70 or more yards.
And Mike Connolly, number 53, cleared the track for Perkins, who freewheels to the Washington 1-yard line.
A few weeks later, he had a monster game versus the Cardinals. In Week 5, Perkins dominated the Giants with 137 rushing yards and over 162 total yards. He averaged a mind-boggling 8.6 yards per carry. He led all halfbacks in yards that season and was again top 5 in rushing yards among all players. In Perkins' first 3 years as a halfback, he went to 3 straight Pro Bowls. He was 3rd in the league in combined rushing yards. He was top 5 in rushing touchdowns twice in 3 seasons.
Lightning fast 53-yard game.
Keep in mind, from 1961 to 1964, Perkins had to share carries with Amos Marsh.
As Marsh saddles up and gallops through the home team to pace Dallas to a convincing 31-13 victory over the runner-up bowl winner.
While Jim Brown had over 300 carries in one season.
This is Jim Brown, the most devastating ball carrier in the history of football.
The most carries Perkins ever had was 222. But let's do a deep rewind.
Contact is a whole basis of football. And you've got to love contact to be able to play this game of football. And I think Lombardi has instilled that on each and every player on the Green Bay Packers team.
In that championship game, this big guy here made 6 tremendously important Packer first downs and gained 96 vital yards.
In the 50s and the 60s, the league was dominated by the run offense.
Good evening, everyone. This is Harry Wismer inviting you to join me on the 50-yard line of the nation's professional gridiron.
Players like Jim Brown and Jim Taylor dominated football. If you look back at the numbers from 1950 to 1980, the NFL never had a season with more pass plays than run plays on average. So the league was a heavy running league. The difference was that unlike in modern times, the fullback in the 60s was the main carriers of the ball, while halfbacks were second options. Fullbacks like Jim Brown and Jim Taylor dominated carries. Keep in mind, defenses were smaller and less athletic compared to the average fullback. Fullbacks were big and fast. A 300-pound lineman on either side of the ball was unheard of in the 60s. In 61, Dallas had a left tackle named Bob Fry, who wore 235 pounds. 235 pounds. While on the other hand, Bob Lilly, a defensive tackle, was the biggest defensive lineman and player on the team, and he wore 260 pounds. I mean, Dallas even had a defensive end that was barely 6 feet tall and wore just 234 pounds. If we compare this defensive end to Jim Brown, who was a fullback, he was 6'2" and wore 235 pounds. Jim Brown, a fullback, bigger than a defensive end. In fact, if you look at Dallas's entire offensive line, no one wore more than 247 pounds. According to the Associated Press, the number of 300-pound players has increased significantly over the years. In 1970, there was only one 300-pound lineman. In 1980, 3. By 1990, it rose to 94, and by 2000, it skyrocketed to 301. Even Perkins tried to imitate NFL fullbacks by going on what he called the biscuit and gravy training camp before the actual Dallas training camp started. He reported 20 pounds heavier. Landry had what was called the Landry Mile, where Landry tested his team's grit and determination. Let's just say Perkins miserably failed. It was awful, all because he thought Landry wanted him bigger like the rest of the fullbacks in the league. But Landry had other plans, and Perkins lost those pounds before the season started. This is why Perkins' success to me was more valuable, because he dominated a league that was built to be dominated by fullbacks who were bigger players.
The situation dictated certain simple strategy. Give the ball to Perkins.
Perkins was just 5'10", who hardly wore 200 pounds. In terms of his height and weight's contrast to defensive linemen in the league in his era, he was a forerunner of a true running back of modern times. His small frame in the 60s would be perfect in today's NFL. Let's also give Landry some credit here as well. At a time when the league was dominated by fullbacks, Landry's rushing attack was led by a true running back. Landry was a decade ahead of his time. Perkins was spectacular as a halfback. Keep in mind, from 1961 to 1964, Perkins was a true halfback. Each year in that time span, outside of 63, he led all true halfbacks in rushing yards. Perkins was a monster in his day. He had vision and quickness and was a highly smart football player.
The ability to keep his feet after absorbing the jolts of would-be tackles makes Perkins very difficult to contain.
What he lacked in speed, he made it up in durability. Perkins was strong as an ox. Although he was just 5'10", 204 pounds, he was the best blocking back of his time. Perkins would absolutely stone you at the line of scrimmage. In 65, Landry moved Perkins to fullback.
This is Don Perkins, small as fullbacks go, but a rugged, determined runner who has just redeemed himself for his earlier fumble.
But remember, Landry knew that Perkins was reaching his end, and in the 60s, the average length of a running back was 5 to 6 years. In 65, it was Perkins' 5th season running the ball, so the wear and tear was there. The Cowboys tried drafting Jimmy Siddle that year, but he had to switch him to fullback. But unfortunately, Siddle was hurt in training camp and never played it down for the Dallas Cowboys. Landry tried out another legendary player at running back, Mel Renfro. The Cowboys selected Renfro out of Oregon as a running back late in the draft, but that didn't work either. He moved Renfro to safety, one of the greatest decisions of his coaching career.
An all-pro safety, ended the year at cornerback, and may also become an all-pro at that position.
But what Landry didn't know was, he had a budding star on the defensive side of the ball playing safety, Dan Reeves. Reeves was an undrafted free agent in 65. Landry moved Reeves over as the running back in 66. And for the first time, Landry had a splash player. Reeves was amazing. I'm not going into his numbers, that's for another video. But before his injury, Reeves was a promising star. He was on his way to becoming the next great Dallas Cowboys.
Rookie Dan Reeves takes advantage of the goalpost and powers for another Dallas touchdown.
The ball in their own 26. Here's Meredith rolling out to the left. He's looking for Reeves. Reeves has the ball to 35.
After that down year for Perkins in 65, during his first year at fullback, Landry tried to scramble away to find his replacement, but Perkins, the ultimate competitor, wasn't done yet. Although halfback Reeves led the team in yards, Perkins wasn't that far behind as an undersized fullback in Landry's system. Perkins was still top 10 in rushing yards. He was also tied for second in the league in rushing touchdowns. He went to the Pro Bowl as a fullback, the first fullback in Cowboys history to make the Pro Bowl. Reeves and Perkins led the second best rushing attack in football, and Dallas was the league's leader in rushing touchdowns. Dallas made it to their first NFL championship game, but lost in a classic. Perkins and Frank Clark dominated that game. Perkins scored a 23-yard touchdown. The next season, teams in the league surprisingly changed their rushing attack philosophy. Running backs became the leaders of the rushing game. They finally caught up to Landry's methods.
Then I saw game film of Gale in action, and I never saw such moves in my life.
Yet still, even during this football revolution, Perkins continued to be an anomaly. In a league that was now dominated by halfbacks, he led all fullbacks in rushing yards.
The Cowboys' top ground gainer is number 43, Don Perkins. Perk, though one of the game's smallest, is still one of the most feared fullbacks in the National Football League.
And was 6th in yards among all players, including running backs. He was top 5 in touchdowns and made it to his 5th Pro Bowl of his career and 2nd Pro Bowl in 2 seasons as a fullback. In his last year, Landry moved him back to where it all started, the headback position. Perkins wouldn't disappoint. The old legend put together another elite season. He was 6th in rushing yards for his 2nd consecutive year and made it to his 6th Pro Bowl in 8 seasons. The only running backs in Cowboys history to have 6 or more Pro Bowl selections was Don Perkins and Emmitt Smith. Perkins, along with Dorsett and Smith, is the only running back to be in the top 6 in rushing yards 5 times in their careers. Perkins was the first to be Rookie of the Year in Dallas Cowboys history. But here's where Perkins separates himself in terms of durability. He's the only running back in Cowboys history to be in the top 10 in rushing yards for almost an entire decade.
This 28-yard touchdown run topped off a 103-yard performance in the game and moved Perkins past Steve Van Buren into 5th place on the all-time rushing list.
8 years to be exact. Now, think about that for a second. Regardless of the record of the Cowboys in the 60s, especially those early years, Perkins was Mr. Consistent year and year out. For his entire career, regardless of position or record, he was elite in every single year for a decade. Now think about it. Who can we say that about outside of offensive lineman Larry Allen or Zach Martin? Staubach had his first game in '69, but he didn't make his mark until '71. The triplets, Dorsett, Pearson, and every other major star had great years, but they also had seasons where they wasn't elite. That was never the case for Don Perkins. No disrespect to the GOAT, Emmitt Smith, but Perkins was the first Mr. Consistent. I mean, how can you be elite every year of your career? That is impressive. Rest in peace, Don Perkins. And if no one else says it, I will. You will always be a Cowboys legend. Until next time, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.